All right, so for today's lesson at home, while I'm working with the students in class, there's a couple of things that I'd like you to try. I'd like you to go back into your sketches and the prep work that we did yesterday. Find your lines, your thin lines and your thick lines. I want you to experiment with something, maybe taking either the bigger brush that you have or a smaller brush. It's up to you, but I'd like you to take some water and I want you to just drag it over one of your lines, set of lines, and see what happens. Just to see that the water picks up the old paint, even though it's dry. So you can always go back into it. The other thing I want you to try is a very watered down paintbrush, and maybe choose another color. And I'm going to use the blue's complementary color. We know it's complementary, the color wheel, opposite on the color wheel. So I'm going to use some orange. And what I'd like you to do is to do a really watered down orange. So I'm going to just put it into just a clean spot, just so I can get it to be just the watered down that I want. And maybe put a little bit more water in there. And then I'd like you to just trail a swipe over it, just to see the difference that you can kind of see underneath there. Try it on another one. It's got some of that blue, just to see that you can, it will drag over it and it will change your color. So just to see what happens. That's the first thing I'd like you to do. The second thing is going to take a little bit longer. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn my page. It's not that big of a deal. This is all just practice. Give yourself a new page. And then I want you to go into your house and find a sphere. There's all sorts of places that you can find a sphere. I just am using this right here. And with a pencil, very lightly, I want you to make a circle in your sketchbook. It should be a bigger sphere. If it's really small, it might be more challenging. What I'd like you to do is to try to match the value of this sphere here. So we're just matching. And so what I'd like you to do is to use one hue. I'm just going to take maybe this green that I have here. It's like a blue-green. And I'm going to go ahead and start. And so you're going to use one hue for this paint, for this painting. And I really want you to try very carefully to control that line. So you can use any of the techniques that we looked at yesterday, but knowing that we kind of have to move fast because it dries fast. So the first thing to do is just to kind of create that space of your sphere, because we know that this is going to end up being darker, and we will add darker values to it. But this is where you're really going to have to control that brush, staying within the lines. And we also have that great paper towel because we want a smooth transition there. We don't want it to be so dark. So I'm going to take the paper towel and kind of dab it a little bit. I'm also going to get more water, kind of pull that in a little bit, clean my brush because it's got a lot of that green on there, just so I can smooth some of that out. It's not white, but it definitely is lighter. So the transition is a smooth transition. We have to understand how to do a sharp line, but also a smooth transition. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going with this. So when light hits an object, this is something that's really kind of a good thing to practice with. When light hits an object, there's a light source. So the direct light source is hitting that spot, and this is all shade and a shadow. So we're going to keep doing some of this green and build that color, because we know that by building the color, because that's the one thing about watercolor is you build that color. I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit more of a drier brush to work with that gradation. But we know that with watercolor, you want to build slowly. You don't want to jump ahead really fast. That's where some people kind of have some issues, because if you go too fast, then you've got a bit of an issue with pulling it lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this around a little bit, controlling my brush with my hand right down on the table. Okay? So building that slowly, the darker I go. Now I'm going to take that green and I've got to work with some shade. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in a spot. You can use the side, you can use the palette, whatever colors you're using. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use brown for my shade. You can use black, you can use brown, you can use a dark blue, but I'm going to build that color and kind of mix it in here so that I'll be able to use the shade. All right. Once I have that color that I know is going to be darker and a shade, with this wet, I'm going to go ahead and follow this space. Now, this is a very interesting kind of something that I want you to think about. Because the light source is hitting this spot right here, what we have is a shadow. And that shadow is very important because that shadow defines this side of the sphere. Because what happens is there is a shadow, and the shadow is created by the reflected, by the light, and this casts that shadow to make it dark. Kind of dipped in there a little bit that I don't like that. So again, it's all about the pressure. It's all about how much I'm pushing down. And then I can kind of squeeze in here, clean off my brush, because this is darker than what I have it right now. So this part right here, if you look really closely, is a little bit lighter. What that's called, it's called reflected light. Reflected light is where the area is not getting the shade, so it's reflected light. It's kind of like with the planets. You've probably learned a little bit of that in science. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to start working on this side now to smooth this out. And this is a cooler shadow. This is a warmer shadow because I used brown. This almost looks like it had a dark blue or was made with black. So I'm going to come around here, create that shadow. And then with a dry brush, you see that sharp line right there? I don't want that sharp line, so I'm going to take a dry brush and in between there, I'm going to work it through so it's not so sharp. So it creates more of a gradation. What we're going for is a sphere that looks three-dimensional. Clean my brush, using that dry on dry, right? That's kind of where that can come into play. And then maybe use some water to thin that out, smooth it out. Dig in there, pull some of that up, clean it off on my paper towel, dig it in, smooth. The key is smooth, and if it gets too choppy, you can even use your fingers. Sometimes I use that. Just whatever works, whatever you need it to do. I also want to work on this shadow a little bit. Within this, just to kind of make it more cohesive with my shadow that's over here. But I really think it's important to get that reflected light. That's right in here. Show the difference. This could probably be a little bit darker. Build that up. Okay, now I'm going to work on my shadow, getting that shadow over here to be smoother. I'm going to do is take some water, thin that out. But I do like that it has that darker line. It had dried a little bit, so now it's got the darker line, so it feels more like my sphere. Let that dry a little bit, and it feels, just makes more sense, like the sphere. I can come in here and kind of smooth some of that out, but not too much because I don't want to take the paint away. But I want that reflected light. Make sure that my shadow makes sense. Like this shouldn't come down too far. Come in here, do a little bit of dabbing here. Make sure that that line goes straight that way so it makes sense. And then maybe throw a little bit more green in through here, just to darken that up a little bit. The one thing that we did not talk about is how when watercolor dries, it does dry a little lighter. So sometimes you'll come back to a painting and be like, what? That's not how I left it, right? But that's the kind of the allure of this color, of this this material. I'm gonna throw a little bit more brown in here, just darker. Definitely needed that. And now I have to rework this to have more of a smoother gradation there. Nice clean, wipe my brush off, dig that out. So it's really just finding that right combination of how much water you're using, how much dry brush, so that you just get just the right look that you're going for. A nice, in the smooth gradations where you want smooth, and the sharp lines where you want sharpness. So it's how much water and how dry your brush is. And that's your sphere. So I'd like you to work on that today in class while I'm working with the class on the project that you guys are going to do tomorrow. I hope you have fun.